It was a crisp morning in London, and the royal guards stood like statues outside Buckingham Palace. Their tall bearskin hats, dark uniforms, and straight posture made them look almost otherworldly. People from all over the world gathered to catch a glimpse of the famous soldiers, snapping photos and whispering excitedly as they waited for the changing of the guard ceremony. The palace gates stood open, welcoming tourists, but the guards remained as still as stone, their eyes fixed forward. Among the crowd, there was one person who stood out, a tall man in a Russian naval uniform, his broad shoulders and confident stride catching the attention of everyone around him. Sergei, a decorated Russian Marine, had come to London as part of a military delegation. He was proud of his service and the medals he wore, symbols of his hard work and courage. But today, as he walked through the streets of London, something about the Royal Guards fascinated him. He had heard stories about their discipline, their unshakable commitment to their duty, but he didn't truly understand it until now. Sergei was used to authority. He had been trained to lead and command, to expect respect from those around him. The thought of someone refusing to follow orders seemed impossible to him. So when he spotted a royal guard standing perfectly still, his curiosity got the better of him. With a confident smile, Sergei made his way toward the guard, ready to test this famous discipline for himself. He couldn't help but wonder if these guards were truly as unmovable as people said. As he approached, the crowd took notice. Some people whispered, others turned their cameras toward him. They must have recognized his uniform, or perhaps they just sensed the confidence he exuded. Sergei stopped directly in front of the guard, just a few feet away. The guard did not move. His eyes remained fixed ahead, his face completely expressionless. There was no sign of recognition, no hint of emotion. Sergei smiled, thinking to himself that this would be easy. Surely, this soldier would step aside or acknowledge him, given his position and rank. He leaned forward, his voice low but commanding. "At ease, soldier," he said in both Russian and English, expecting the guard to follow his order and break his stance. After all, Sergei was a Marine, a man who had earned respect through action. He didn't believe anyone could stand up to his authority. But the guard didn't flinch, not even a tiny shift in his posture. He stood perfectly still, a statue in a uniform. Sergei frowned, surprised by the lack of response. He thought for a moment that the guard had simply not heard him. So he took a step closer, now standing just inches from the soldier, and repeated the command, a little louder this time, "At ease." Still, there was no reaction. The guard remained frozen in place, his eyes never leaving their fixed position. The crowd, sensing the growing tension, fell quiet. Some began to murmur, wondering if they were witnessing something unusual. Sergei's confidence began to falter. Why wasn't the guard responding? Didn't he know who Sergei was? But the royal guard didn't move. In that moment, it became clear. This was not a game. This soldier was here for one purpose, and nothing could shake him from his post. Sergei stood there, face to face with the royal guard, a strange feeling creeping over him. He had never encountered someone who didn't respond to his command. Back in Russia, he was used to people following orders without question, especially those in uniform. But this guard wasn't like anyone he had met before. There was something about his stillness, his complete lack of movement, that made Sergei's confidence start to waver. The crowd had begun to notice the unusual situation. A few tourists took out their phones, recording what they thought was a funny moment. Some whispered to each other, unsure of what was happening, while others watched in silence, wondering if Sergei would be able to get a reaction from the guard. But the royal guard didn't budge. Not even a single muscle twitched. Sergei took a small step back, still studying the soldier. He was intrigued now. Why wasn't the guard reacting? Was he being disrespectful or simply following orders too strictly? Sergei's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. In his world, rank and respect were everything. Yet here he was, standing in front of someone who seemed unmoved by his status. He cleared his throat and tried again, his voice firm. "I said, at ease." He was sure this time the guard would have no choice but to respond. After all, who could ignore such a direct order? But again, the guard stood as though he hadn't heard a thing. The moment stretched longer, and Sergei felt his patience begin to thin. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. The guard's behavior was deliberate. Sergei's eyes narrowed as he considered what to do next. Could he push this further? Was he being tested? Or was this just how the royal guards behaved? In the background, the British officer who had been watching quietly from the side began to walk toward them. He had a calm, almost amused expression on his face as he approached the scene. The officer cleared his throat and spoke directly to Sergei. "Sir," he said politely, "I'm afraid our guards are not permitted to respond to any commands except those given by their own superior officers. It's part of our tradition and discipline." Sergei looked at the officer, confused for a moment. "So, you're saying this soldier won't listen to me because I'm not his commander?" he asked, still not fully understanding. The officer nodded. "Exactly, sir. These guards are part of a centuries-old tradition of service. They remain absolutely still and follow only the orders they've been given. It's a mark of respect for their role in protecting the monarchy." Sergei's pride was bruised. He wasn't used to hearing that kind of explanation. Back home, his reputation meant something. But here, in front of the royal guard, it seemed irrelevant. He glanced at the soldier again, who hadn't moved a muscle, and realized that this wasn't about rank or authority. It was about something deeper, something that ran through centuries of British history. The officer gave him a polite smile. "If you'd like to continue observing, feel free. But please understand, this is just how we do things here." Sergei nodded slowly, the weight of the lesson settling in. As he stepped back into the crowd, he realized that sometimes respect wasn't about who gave the orders. Sometimes it was about silently standing your ground and knowing that nothing could shake you. Sergei stood back, a little stunned by the officer's explanation. The crowd around him was still watching, and a few people were chuckling at the unexpected turn of events. He tried to shake off the feeling of embarrassment, but it was difficult. For someone who had served in the military for years and earned respect through hard work and discipline, being ignored by a royal guard felt like a blow to his pride. He was not used to being put in his place, especially not in front of an audience. The officer gave him one last polite nod before walking away, leaving Sergei to reflect on what had just happened. As he took a step back, his mind began to work through the situation again. This wasn't just about rank. This wasn't about who gave the orders. The royal guard had taught him something today, a lesson he hadn't expected to learn on his visit to London. Sergei watched as the guard remained in place, unfazed by the small crowd gathered around him. The wind picked up slightly, and a few tourists took more pictures, some still whispering about the incident. But the guard remained focused, his posture unwavering. It was as if nothing could distract him from his duty, nothing could pull him away from his post. It was a strange kind of strength that Sergei had never seen before. It wasn't about power or force. It was about discipline and commitment, values Sergei respected, but hadn't fully understood until now. He couldn't help but admire the guard, even though he had been challenged in a way he hadn't expected. Sergei realized that this guard wasn't just standing still for tradition's sake. He was standing firm for a reason. He was a part of something much bigger than himself, something rooted in centuries of history and pride. Sergei had always thought of respect as something to be earned through actions, through proving yourself. But here, in front of the royal guard, he had learned that sometimes respect was about quietly maintaining your post, about holding your ground no matter what. The guard's stillness was powerful in its simplicity. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. Sergei had learned that day that true strength wasn't always loud or forceful. Sometimes it was about being unwavering in the face of anything that might try to disturb your peace. And this guard, standing tall in front of Buckingham Palace, had shown Sergei just how strong that kind of discipline could be. As the crowd began to disperse and the changing of the guard ceremony continued, Sergei stood there for a moment longer. He was still deep in thought, reflecting on the lesson he had just received. In the end, it wasn't about who was in charge or who could give the best command. It was about the quiet, unshakable strength of standing firm in your duty. Sergei may have thought he was there to teach a lesson, but in the end, it was the royal guard who had taught him something far more valuable. The sun was starting to climb higher in the sky as Sergei walked away from Buckingham Palace, his mind still occupied with the events of the morning. He had never imagined that his brief encounter with a royal guard would leave such a lasting impact on him. As he joined the rest of his group, he could hear them chatting excitedly about the changing of the guard, but Sergei was quiet, his thoughts focused on what had just happened. He couldn't stop thinking about the guard's stillness, the way he had refused to acknowledge Sergei's challenge. At first, Sergei had felt frustrated, even a bit insulted. He had been used to people responding to his commands, to his position. But now, as he thought more about it, he realized that the guard's actions weren't about disrespect. They were about something much deeper. It was about discipline, tradition, and commitment. Sergei had learned that the strength of a person wasn't always measured by how they responded in the moment. Sometimes, true strength came from standing firm, from not being swayed by outside influences. The group continued their walk through London, but Sergei found himself lagging behind. The city around him was lively, full of people and noise, but his mind remained in that small courtyard outside the palace. The more he thought about the royal guard, the more he admired the way he had carried out his duty. Sergei had always thought that discipline was about following orders and showing strength through action. But the royal guard had shown him that it could also be about quiet determination, about holding your position no matter what. As Sergei walked, he couldn't help but notice the small things. The way people moved through the streets, the way they went about their daily routines, their work and their life. He began to see the same kind of quiet determination in them. People who woke up early to do their jobs, people who worked hard to take care of their families, people who kept going even when life got tough. Sergei had always seen himself as someone who led through action, through force, but now he realized that strength came in many forms. Sometimes it was about simply showing up and doing your part, no matter how hard or uncomfortable it might be. As the day wore on, Sergei began to feel a new sense of respect for the people around him. He had come to London expecting to teach and to be respected for his experience. Instead, he had learned a valuable lesson from a royal guard, a lesson about quiet strength, about discipline, and about the power of standing firm in your beliefs, even when no one is watching. Sergei knew that he would never forget the lesson he had learned that day. It wasn't just about the royal guard or the palace, it was about life itself. Sometimes, the greatest strength is found in standing still, in holding your ground, and in knowing when to remain quiet and steadfast. As he rejoined his group, Sergei looked around at the city of London with a new sense of understanding. The hustle and bustle of the streets, the people going about their day, seemed to hold a deeper meaning now. Sergei may have come to London to see the sights, but what he had truly discovered was something far more important: the quiet power of discipline and strength that could be found in the most unexpected places. The rest of the day passed by in a blur for Sergei, but his thoughts kept drifting back to that moment outside Buckingham Palace. As he walked through the streets of London with his group, he couldn't help but think about the lesson he had learned from the royal guard. At first, it had seemed like a simple misunderstanding, an encounter where Sergei tried to pull rank. But as the day went on, he realized that it had been much more than that. The more Sergei thought about it, the more he began to see the guard in a different light. He had expected the soldier to react, to challenge him back, or at least acknowledge him. But instead, the guard had stood there like a statue, completely unshaken. There had been no words, no confrontation. It was as if the guard had known that he didn't need to respond to anyone but his superior officers. This was his job, his duty, and he would fulfill it no matter what. Sergei found himself reflecting on his own role in the world. He had always seen himself as a man of action, someone who led by example. In his career, he had always taken charge, expecting others to follow his orders. But now, he was beginning to understand that true leadership wasn't always about giving orders. Sometimes, leadership was about discipline, about standing firm in the face of challenges and doing your job without the need for applause or recognition. The royal guard had shown him that strength could be quiet, that discipline could be unspoken. The group continued their tour of London, but Sergei's mind wasn't fully in the present. His thoughts kept circling back to the moment with the guard. He had traveled thousands of miles to experience the history and culture of London, but it was this brief encounter with a soldier outside the palace that had changed something in him. It had reminded him that respect wasn't something that could be demanded. It was something that had to be earned through actions, through quiet consistency, and through a willingness to do what was right, no matter the circumstances. As they made their way toward the London Eye, Sergei's attention was drawn to the faces of the people around him. They all seemed to be busy with their own lives, walking quickly or talking with friends. Some were laughing, some were focused on their phones, but none of them were distracted by the same things that had occupied Sergei's mind. For a brief moment, he felt out of place. His mind was full of thoughts about duty, respect, and strength, while the world around him moved on, as if nothing had happened. The group stopped for a break, and Sergei found himself sitting on a bench, still lost in his thoughts. He realized that the lesson he had learned wasn't something that could be explained easily. It wasn't just about the Royal Guard or about London's history. It was about life itself, about the quiet strength that people showed every day, whether in uniform or not. Sergei understood now that strength wasn't about force or authority. It was about remaining steady, doing your job with pride, and never letting anything shake you from your path. As the group gathered to continue their sightseeing, Sergei stood up from the bench, feeling a sense of calm that hadn't been there before. He still had a lot to learn, but he felt more aware now, more connected to the world around him. And as they walked toward their next destination, Sergei couldn't help but smile, knowing that the Royal Guard had taught him a lesson that would stay with him long after his trip to London was over. The following day, Sergei woke up early, as was his habit, but this time his mind was clear. He had learned something new during his time in London, something that was still settling within him. As he looked out of his hotel window, watching the city come to life, he reflected on the lessons from the previous day. He realized how much that brief encounter with the Royal Guard had changed his perspective. His group had already planned another day of sightseeing, but Sergei wasn't in a hurry to leave. He had come to London to experience its history and culture, but now he understood that sometimes the most valuable lessons weren't found in museums or grand buildings. They came in the quiet moments when he least expected them. After breakfast, the group set off again, walking through the streets of London, but Sergei walked with a sense of purpose. His thoughts were calmer, and he found himself taking in the details around him more than he had before. The busy markets, the sounds of people talking and laughing, the smooth rhythm of life in the city. All of it felt different now. It was as if he was seeing it through new eyes. As they passed by the palace again, Sergei couldn't resist stopping. The Royal Guard was still in place, standing at attention, perfectly still. The crowd had gathered around them again, snapping pictures and pointing, but Sergei was no longer focused on the spectacle. He was focused on the guard, who stood as unmoving as ever. He could see the focus in the guard's eyes, the dedication to his role. Sergei knew now that the soldier wasn't just standing there because it was his job. He was standing there because he believed in what he was doing. It wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about discipline and duty, two things that had become more important to Sergei than ever before. One of the tourists nearby noticed Sergei and asked if he wanted to take a photo with the guard. Sergei smiled politely, shaking his head. He no longer saw the guard as a figure to be admired from a distance or something to be used for a photo opportunity. He saw the guard for what he truly was, a person carrying out his duty with quiet strength and dedication. This was not about the uniform or the rank. It was about the responsibility that came with it. As the group moved on to their next stop, Sergei lingered behind, watching the guard for a few more moments. There was something deeply reassuring in the way the soldier stood, unaffected by the distractions around him. Sergei had learned that strength came from within, and that true respect came from the ability to remain steady, no matter the circumstances. Later, as the group explored the rest of London, Sergei felt a sense of calm. His thoughts were more focused, his heart less restless. He had come to London seeking new experiences, but he had found something deeper, something that would stay with him long after the trip ended. The lesson he had learned from the Royal Guard was simple yet profound. Sometimes, the greatest strength is found in remaining steady, in doing your duty without needing to be noticed, and in being unwavering in your commitment to what you believe in. The days passed quickly for Sergei as he continued his trip through London. Each day seemed to bring something new, whether it was a visit to a historic landmark or a quiet moment of reflection. But no matter where he went, his thoughts always returned to that one event with the Royal Guard. It had stuck with him in a way he hadn't expected, and now, as he walked through the busy streets of London one more time, he felt a deep sense of understanding that hadn't been there before. On this day, Sergei found himself walking alone through the city, having split off from his group. They had planned to visit the Tower of London, But Sergei felt like he needed some time to think, to process everything that had happened. The crowds were thick, and the sound of people laughing and talking filled the air. But Sergei felt strangely calm. He wasn't in a rush to be anywhere. For the first time in a long while, he simply wanted to be present, to observe the world around him without the pressure of time. He made his way to a small park near the Thames, sitting on a bench and looking out over the river. The calm waters seemed to reflect his own state of mind. Everything felt clearer now. He understood that the lessons he had learned from the Royal Guard weren't just about discipline or standing firm in the face of challenges. They were about living with purpose, about doing what needed to be done even when no one was watching. It was easy to act with strength when there was an audience, but real strength came from being steadfast when no one was looking, when the task was difficult, and when there was no immediate reward. As he sat there, Sergei thought about his own life. As a Marine, he had spent years following orders, leading teams, and performing difficult tasks. There had always been a sense of pride in what he did, but now he realized that he hadn't always understood the deeper value of his work. Being a leader wasn't just about giving commands. It was about inspiring others through action, through commitment, and through a steady, quiet presence. The Royal Guard had reminded him of that. They didn't shout or boast about their role. They simply showed up, day after day, without expectation of recognition. Their dedication spoke louder than any words could. Sergei smiled to himself, feeling a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in a long time. His visit to London had started as a chance to see new things, to explore a city filled with history, but it had turned into something much more. It had turned into a journey of self-reflection, a chance to learn something important about strength and leadership. As he stood up to continue walking along the river, Sergei felt lighter. He still had much to learn, and there would be challenges ahead. But now he knew that the true measure of strength wasn't in how loud or forceful a person could be. It was in the quiet determination, in the commitment to duty, and in the ability to stay true to one's purpose, even in the most difficult moments. The sound of footsteps behind him brought him back to the present, and as he turned to see his group approaching, he felt ready to continue his journey, not just through London, but through life. The final day in London arrived for Sergei, and as he packed his bags, he felt a mixture of emotions. His time in the city had been full of sights, sounds, and experiences, but the most significant lesson he would take home wasn't something he could see or touch. It was a lesson that had unfolded quietly, through a single moment with the Royal Guard. As he zipped up his suitcase, he found himself thinking about how this trip had changed him in ways he hadn't expected. The group gathered in the lobby of the hotel, ready for their last day of sightseeing. Sergei was quieter than usual, but his mind wasn't elsewhere. It was still on the things he had learned over the past week. He had always prided himself on his discipline, his ability to lead and make quick decisions. Yet in London, he had realized that there was another side to strength, one that was more subtle, one that didn't demand attention. The Royal Guard had taught him that sometimes leadership wasn't about loud commands or grand gestures. It was about standing firm, about being reliable, and about doing your job without expecting applause. These lessons would stay with him, no matter where he went. As the group set out for their last tour of the city, Sergei felt a sense of calm that had been absent before. He walked through the streets with a different perspective, observing the people around him. He noticed the small details, how a street vendor smiled at his customers, how a teacher patiently guided a group of children, how a person helped another find their way. It wasn't the grand gestures of power that stood out to Sergei, but the everyday moments of kindness and dedication. He realized that the world was full of people who, like the Royal Guard, quietly carried out their duties with strength and commitment. As they walked through the final landmarks of the city, Sergei felt more at peace with himself than he had in years. The bustle of London, once overwhelming, now seemed like part of a larger, quiet rhythm. He could see how people went about their days, each playing their part in the great, continuous flow of life. In a way, the Royal Guard had helped him to understand this rhythm, to recognize that life wasn't always about making a loud impact. Sometimes, the most important work was done quietly, with purpose and discipline. When it was time to leave for the airport, Sergei stood outside the hotel, looking out at the city one last time. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the sights he had seen, but for the lessons he had learned. The Royal Guard, with their stillness and unwavering discipline, had shown him the power of remaining steady, even in the face of challenges. As Sergei boarded the plane back home, he carried with him a new understanding of leadership, strength, and the quiet strength that exists in every person who does their job with dedication and heart. The journey had come to an end, but the lessons would last a lifetime. And as Sergei flew back to his life, he knew he would look at the world and himself differently from now on.